trying to summarize the California Voting Rights Act very quickly. There's a lot of legal language in there, but essentially what it says is that if you have something called racially polarized voting, you cannot have at-large elections, period.
So it's focused on race? That's what the language says?
Yes, the protected classes are race, color, and language minority group. That's probably getting a little bit more into the legalese than it's warranted here. But yes, it's not, perhaps it should be, but it's not about class, it's not about geography, it is about race. Take that for what it's worth, that's what it is.
And then what does it mean that if a city's not in compliance or they don't heed the ruling of the court, what does that mean?
So in the Palmdale case, the judge back in July said, Palmdale, you're violating the law, and they ignored him, and they're saying, hey, we're going to have an election in November that's at large, just like the illegal ones we've had before, or, to hell with you, Judge Mooney.
Is that what an appeal is called these days? Hell with you, Judge?
I'm sorry, Berta, you know what, they have not filed a notice of appeal, so, okay. Now, we do have a motion for preliminary injunction that's going to be heard on September 30th to prevent them from doing that. They've lost this case. They're violating the law. We live here in the United States by the rule of law. It's not the rule of Jim Ledford and the Palmdale City Council. They don't get to say, we don't think that law is very good, so we're going to ignore it. It's the law. We all have to abide by the law.
Can I ask a question? Is there a standard by which a political district would be judged? Sulphur Springs School District is the one I'm interested in, and the city of Santa Clarita. Is there a standard or guidelines that say if there's this many of a minority in this area, or if there's a certain percentage of the city? You know what I'm getting at? Is there a way of judging? Do you understand what I'm saying? What's the criteria for determining that an area is not in compliance as you might think it should be? In other words, does there have to be a certain percentage? Let's take Hispanics. A certain percentage of Hispanics concentrated in a certain area. Are there any guidelines or standards, or is it just the whim of someone that says, no, I can see it's not so good, so let's change it?
Well, who's going to determine what the district law?
Well, the funny thing is that until the Palmdale case, every other jurisdiction was smart enough not to get to that point. They settled. And then by virtue of settling, they had the opportunity to create those districts cooperatively. We're kind of in uncharted territory with respect to Palmdale, and I don't have a perfect answer for you on that.
In the past, some of this had to happen before, right? So we have to have districting. How were the districts graded? Gerrymandering. What was the geography?
Gerrymandering is kind of a dirty word.
I know. I used it.
There are a number of criteria for the way the districts are drawn. They are not supposed to look like exceptionally weird shapes. I think someone mentioned Texas, the vote dilution in Texas by virtue of drawing oddly shaped districts, and those were very clearly drawn with race and partisanship as the predominant factors. There are a number of rules. You can take into account that you want to group socioeconomically similar communities together. You can use, it's a good idea to use natural boundaries such as main roads, freeways, rivers, etc. as boundaries. Perhaps the existing precinct boundaries are also helpful. The one thing that you cannot do, unless, except in unusual circumstances, is use race as the predominant factor. Race can be a factor, however. Your question, correct me if I'm wrong, is there a particular percentage of a minority population at which the California Voting Rights Act is triggered.
I'm just saying, someone used the word criteria. Is there a criteria that triggers it? That, look, you have so much of this or so much of that in this area, and that triggers it?
Yes.
Is there a criteria or a standard?
Yes, and that criteria is whether there is a history of racially polarized voting. And what that means is statisticians take the election data, and they take the data from the U.S. Census Department of race and ethnicity, and they figure out, okay, in this election, candidate A received this percentage of the Latino vote, estimated, and candidate A received this percentage of the white vote, and African American vote, Asian vote. However many distinct identifiable ethnic groups there are. And when there is a significant difference in the levels of support that candidates receive from those different groups, that's racially polarized voting. And that's particularly so when the candidates preferred by the minority communities lose consistently. And that's been the case, as the Redistricting Partners report shows, that's been the case in Santa Clarita. And the one that I find to be particularly telling in Santa Clarita that the Redistricting Partners report looks to specifically is Scott Wilkes' election in 2011 for the College of the Canyons Board. He received the support of the non-Hispanic white community in Santa Clarita by a decent margin. His opponent received the support of Latinos in Santa Clarita by a significant margin. Scott Wilk won that election. I think it was about 53-47, if my memory serves me correctly. And he used that as a springboard to be elected to the Assembly. Now he's saying that he's going to, I guess, repeal the California Voting Rights Act. Darren, you might know more about that than I do, but
just a rumor. We will not let that happen in California, and our speaker is well aware of what's going on with the California Voting Rights Act, and staff pays particularly close attention to that. Not that he's Latino, but again, it's the case of disenfranchised voters. In the city of Lancaster and Palmdale, as I mentioned earlier, 5,000 votes would get you elected. Used to be 3,500. We have over 200,000 people in each city. In the city of Palmdale, we actually have a majority of Latino voters in our population. A Latino population, not voters, because not all people are registered to vote. But our Latino community is the majority in the city of Palmdale and very close in the city of Lancaster. So it comes down to low voter turnout. You can look over time. Ray Charles can almost look at the charts and tell you that, in fact, people have been disenfranchised. They've given up on this system of government in the cities of Lancaster and Palmdale. And as I said when I began, as we've noticed just by us having this conversation for the first time, our mayor, who has been elected for the last 20 years.
Which mayor? Which city?
Ledford.
Which city?
Palmdale.
Okay.
For the last 20 years. Now finally has opponents in his race. For the first time, he actually has to run a campaign. Same thing for the city council. For the first time, we have people, and it's because we've just talked about it. There has been no resolve in our city. It's going to take our community getting out and having intense conversations with the city councilmen in Palmdale to make them see the light, because spending up the money that they claim they didn't have in order to protect something that they shouldn't be doing is just not right. The city of Palmdale, I actually was part of that case. And in our particular case, there were experts that came to the Antelope Valley, or who testified about the Antelope Valley, who had never set foot in the Antelope Valley. One actually, excuse my stereotype, because I'm sensitive to stereotypes, but he actually looked like Colonel Sanders with the white beard and the whole shot. And I'm saying, this man has never been in our community. He's never been to Antelope Acres. He's never been to Pear Blossom or Juniper Hills, where all these communities are separate. We have very rural, I live on the far west side, where we have very rural property, large lots, actually have farms and animals. That community has no voice in the council and has never had a voice. Juniper Hills, it sits up near where the ski lodge is. That community has never had a voice on the city council. And what we're talking about here, at least from my perspective, is that I believe that we should have a voice. If you live in the inner city, you live in the central part of Lancaster, you may like the boulevard. Well, I moved to the far west side of town because I wanted to see sunsets and poppies and not hear sirens. So when it comes to taking what I feel that needs to be done in my community, there is no one sitting there at the table on an ongoing basis that can bring that view to the table. All of us should have a voice at the table. That's what America's about. So, I'm trying to really get away from people trying to minimize this to race. And when we talk about people, it's easier to accept when you talk about race, but America talks about protected classes because we found over history there are certain classes of people in America that have been disenfranchised for one reason or another. And I'm not going to go back all the way into the history. We don't have to repeat all that. But at the end of the day, I think it is very important that you have a voice from your community because you move to those communities for that very same thing. You move there so you could have a rural setting. You moved into the city because you like loss. So we should have someone that speaks about loss. We should have somebody that speaks about farms. Whatever they look like in the Antelope Valley, there should be separate voices at that table.
That was a good explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.